Let's do a very brief introduction to indifference curves. Indifference curves are trying to measure happiness through something economists call utility. What an indifference curve does is it connects every single point that a person is indifferent between. So for example, maybe we have a point here, right? This is a combination of C2 and C1. Let's call this point A. Now there are a ton of other combinations that would make this individual just as happy. Perhaps it's something down here. Perhaps this point B, there's another level of C1 and C2 that makes this person just as happy. And there's a ton of other combinations of C1 and C2 that would make them happy. And so let's connect this. We're going to do this with just a general utility function, which would be this type of indifference curve. Let's call this U1 for utility 1. And that means that every single point that this touches, this person has the same level of happiness. So this is a single indifference curve, but the combinations of C1 and C2, there's an infinite number of indifference curves. We actually call it an indifference curve plane. So like there's another one that's right here. It's not that this says shift out. This is just another indifference curve. Let's call this U2. And we know that the utility 2 is greater than utility 1. And why is that the case? Well, let's look at this point right here. Let's look at this point. This point is getting us more C1 with the same amount of C2. Or maybe this point right here is more C2 with the same amount of C1. So whenever we see the indifference curves going away from the origin, we know that that's an increase in the overall amount of happiness. Now, in this class, we're not going to worry too much about the actual shape of the indifference curve. Again, in your Econ 302, in your intermediate micro class, you'll talk a lot about the different types of shapes of it. But as you're reading the textbook, it talks a little bit about indifference curves, so I want you to be comfortable with it. The main thing we need to know here is as we go away from the origin, we get happier, and this makes sense because the more consumption, we're going to say we get more utility.